Hello and welcome everyone to the Make Work Happen podcast. I'm Rajat Bhargava, CEO and co-founder of JumpCloud, and I am delighted to welcome Ben Book here to talk to us a little bit about transformation, about the strategic nature of IT. How can we sort of go to the next level? So, we're living in a time of incredible change. I think everybody knows that AI is changing the world pretty significantly. Companies are trying to get more growth. They're, worried about security. They're improving efficiency. Technology is sort of at the center of so much of this innovation. So, I'm delighted to talk to Ben about, some of these topics and more. Ben's a leading voice in the tech community, someone with a deep understanding of these challenges. And Ben's work at GigaOm has provided us all with invaluable insights into the evolving tech landscape. So Ben, before we dive in, tell us a little bit about you, about GigaOm, and then we're going to have a fun time talking about some of your stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Rajat, and great to reciprocate. Great to have you on our podcast. So I'm Ben Book. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at GigaOm. We started as a media company, which is how a lot of people know us from back in the day, about a decade or more ago. We built a research brand and a strategy brand from that media brand. And our goal is to help organizations, solve tactical engineering problems, but also to help them, take on really meaty transformational and strategic challenges. And so it's always a combination of both. You gotta be able to come up with a great strategy, but you gotta be able to execute, right? And so that's the challenge with every technology, especially as it matures and as companies look to mature their business and their operating model. So looking forward to the chat here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to hit you head on right away with, I think, something that is super sort of foundational, which is, is IT a strategic function? I mean, you guys talk to a ton of CIOs, we talk to a ton of organizations, we talk to a ton of CEOs. We think it's strategic, but we're in the business. So,
Yeah.
What are you hearing out there? What's your viewpoint? Is IT sort of this really, really critical function inside of an organization as we think it is, but maybe it's not as important as we think it is.
Yeah, good question, Rajat. I think in our industry we talk a lot about these things: digital transformation, modernization, driving outcomes with technology. I think we've come a long way from IT just being tactical and spinning up servers and running an application that you need. It is so critical, as as everyone is pushing to get more digital services and engage customers better and all of that. But to be honest, it's very hard for IT to be transformational and be a change agent, right? Because IT kind of started with the technical piece, right? And we started with, how do we just keep the lights on, right? And then we moved to, okay, well, how do we help the business kind of operate, right? Now what's being asked of IT and what is being expected, and really what IT leaders want to do, is to be a business enabler and to be a partner to the business. And the best, executive leaders that we know are ahead of the business, right? And are dragging the business with them. So that's kind of the challenge. I think, on the vendor side, to your point, work with a lot of CEOs of vendors, a lot of really amazing technology. Some of that stuff is a little ahead, of IT and a little ahead of where the businesses are. So how do we kind of cross that chasm? How do we bring those two sides together? That's a big part of what we do. And we want to help, both, IT people who want to make that transformation and be a change agent and help change companies make that change in a meaningful way. But it's not something that happens overnight. It doesn't come from just spending $1 billion and, thinking that, I came up with an AI strategy, it's going to work. It requires the hard work to make it successful, right? And so certainly see, many IT teams stepping up to the plate, but we also see a lot of IT teams struggle, right? And that's the same thing that the business has, right, too. Like, how do you actually bring the business with IT together? And it really comes down to strategy, right? How strategy, people, and I'm going to say resources, right? I think a while ago, you would need to hire the most expensive resources and talents. you would need to hire a lot of people to do things. I think AI is a great enabler to this, right? I think a lot of the technologies from networking to security to cloud have always been, okay, let's modernize, let's help enable our business. But how is this actually helping me ship more product, make more product that I can sell, right? Manage the business faster. Those are the things that the business wants. But sometimes the business doesn't even know what to ask from IT, right? So that's kind of the challenge. We have these two different sides of the coin, and IT leaders have a huge opportunity to step up.
So one of the things you said is the difference between people who are successful or not. Is one of those determinants you think, you know, how engaged the rest of the organization is and how supportive they are? Does it mean like you've got to have a CEO that was totally on board championing it? It's just not IT that can sort of drive it or the technology leader that can drive it. I would love to understand kind of how you think about that because I got to believe that this is if you're transforming the organization, if you really want to get the full strategic benefits of IT, it can't be just the technology leader just driving it.
Yeah, it's 100% cultural to your point, right? You need to have, both. You have to have both the executives involved who actually want to make the change too, right? And be with the IT leader. You see a lot of different organizations have like a digital transformation arm where they bring in a chief digital officer or something. Um, it requires the IT team to be able to work in partnership and want to understand how the business runs and how they can better enable the business. And that's where you kind of run into problems, right? Because IT is like, well, what do you need to build? And the business is like, well, what can you build? And then they're like, well, I can build this. Okay, well, then let's build that. And then we now just build something that IT thinks that the business needs, but it's actually not enabled with the business process. So I think the thing that we're seeing with AI, and I think the excitement around AI is that AI is a real enabler around business process. And if you can get the IT team and the business to align around the business operations and process, that's where the biggest change happens, right? Because you can't have just this big boom strategy. We're going to do this, big AI digital transformation project. It's going to cost us $5 billion in 5 years. It has to be very tactical and it has to be agile, right? You can have a great strategy. Maybe you do want to bite off that 5 billion, but maybe do it in chunks of 10 or something, chunks of 20, 100. Like think of them in like little micro projects, right? Because they all build on each other. Doing something all at once is very, very difficult, right? With change management, even with IT teams to change and have their teams change to understand how to be a better consultant to the business. And then a lot of it's communication, right? I think we all speak totally different language. Even in companies near your company, my company, engineering and sales, marketing and HR, everyone has different objectives. How do you get the objectives aligned? And to be honest, when you just get quick, easy wins, that just gets people excited, right? When the finance team says, "Hey, can you try this thing out with?" A couple of years ago, as RPA was kind of cool to get the business enabled very quickly, and a lot of these kind of time to value projects going. Now it's AI. How do I actually, take this thing, get it done in a couple weeks, not wait months? So it comes down to trust. So you can trust the team and you just keep building on it, right?
So I'm actually wondering how much do you think the success also determines whether AI can speak in the language of the business. So basically, the onus is on IT to say, "Hey, I'm going to understand you more," so that kind of your example was, well, the business doesn't know what they want necessarily, but you know, is the onus on IT to say, "Hey, we're going to go study, we're going to learn what the business needs, so that we can actually be a better partner," instead of making sort of the business figure out technology. We're going to meet them more than halfway, so that they actually can be much more successful. Are you seeing that sort of? The folks that do that end up being far more successful than the folks that sort of just sit back and say, "Hey, I'm going to wait for the business to define what they need."
100%. I mean, both of them are complicated, right? The business has complicated processes and requirements, and IT has the same thing. But yes, I see the most strategic IT leaders that we work with, and I have one in my organization. They understand the business and the customer just as well as the business does, right? and they're just as invested and they're just as excited about the business as they are about IT, right? And that is the key, right? And so it requires that curiosity, it requires that impetus, and it requires to your point, like IT to almost take on more than the business, right? To stay ahead of them and to learn, what can we do that's beyond just uptime, right? Or onboarding or whatever it is, like, those little metrics that you're trying to constantly creep. It's like, how am I actually going to change the way that the business looks at me? So they actually come to me to say, well, what do we do next? Right. That's what I think excites those leaders. Um, there's leaders all kind of across the spectrum. I would say that the IT leaders that want to, make a change and be engaged with the business, um, I think find a partner in the business that also wants to treat you in that business partner way, right? So, having a change agent on the business side, partnering with the technology team to help them grow and understand, start to challenge what they're thinking, I think is key. So you got to find someone in the business. There's always one person, right, that wants to change things, and it's not always at the top. It's not always at the bottom. It's sometimes in between.
Yeah, and so is the opposite true? The ones that maybe don't engage in that level of depth, and those are sort of where the projects fail, or maybe talk a little bit about where you see when things kind of don't go well. Because yeah, the ones that go well are the ones where maybe everybody's super engaged, they're motivated, the business needs it. Like that seemed pretty straightforward. But what about the cases where maybe IT isn't driving it, and what happens in those cases, or the downside cases?
Yeah, it happens all the time, right? Every day. Good example would be one of our projects that one of our AI leaders worked on was a call center project. That project was specifically around how do we, decrease tickets and improve efficiency, right? And so that was kind of the overall, metric, right, that the business said. And then they kind of handed it off to IT to kind of go figure it out. Um, Guess what? The project worked. Like IT built the thing for the call center, but it never actually went live because it didn't solve the other business context requirements that the business needed, right? And so I think the business also didn't think, oh well, what is possible here, right? And getting the IT team to actually engage the business on what is possible, was kind of missed, right? So I would say they kind of missed the strategy piece, and they said, hey, this is kind of a tactical thing. We think it's easy. AI can solve this problem. We see lots of news articles on it, right? Like it's table stakes, right? Um, and it wasn't, right? Nothing is table stakes. Every business has a different context, and different needs, right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, obviously, at first blush, of course, we want less tickets. We want, faster resolution, more efficient resolution. All that makes sense. But then, if it doesn't go live, then something in the chain didn't work.
That's right. And I think a lot of these things, like, I was talking to a founder of a data company like 6 months ago, and we were talking about agentic AI at the time. And, we were talking, he was like talking about the use cases, and I'm like, dude, it's the same use case over and over again. We've been trying to solve for customer 360 or personalization or whatever. Like, we have to kind of get beyond like the same use cases every single time. Let's think a little bit different. Let's also think about how the use cases are connected, right? Because if you can kind of build a thread and interconnection between the use cases, that starts to look like a strategy. When you're solving a use case, you're solving kind of a pain point, right? Or a feature set, probably, right? So the bigger you kind of take off, the more strategic it ends up. But again, also the harder to do, right?
Yep, makes sense. So let's switch gears just a little bit. So let's assume IT is strategic to an organization, and they are motivated and interested in kind of transformation, or figuring out um, what what's next for them. What are the things that you're seeing? What are the places you're being asked to weigh in on sort of some of these digital transformation needs? What's sort of top of mind? Is it AI, or is there other stuff that people are? Is it still cloud migration, cloud transformation is still kind of the top thing that people are thinking about? What's sort of what are you seeing in your research and your interactions?
Yeah, well, all those things just keep moving on, right? People are on their some of them on the first cloud migration, right? And the impetus is things like AI, right? Sometimes it's they're on their seventh cloud migration, and the impetus is AI or something. Um, but I think if you kind of go back a little bit in time, let's call it 10 years or so. We were talking about modernizing with cloud. Then it was about modernizing with data. Um, and I think a lot of those were really about agility, moving faster, building more digital products. A lot of companies have had a lot of success with those things. And so the companies who have had success are now onto their, now we got to work on our AI strategy and move quickly. But there's a lot of industries who haven't needed to do that, right? Or wanted to do that. And then there's a lot of companies within verticals that may have not seen the need to do it. So, for example, manufacturing. Manufacturing is uh, you know a a more physical labor, physical requirements. It is not a digital business, right? So they're like, well, why do I need to go to the cloud? What's the purpose? Why do I need to get my data together? Um, Now we are seeing that manufacturers actually want to almost leapfrog, but they can't, right? You cannot leapfrog. You have to go through the steps to do this right, right? So that's kind of the challenge I think we see um, across different verticals. So yes, many of them are working on their cloud migration. Many of them are now, working through how do we actually build our data architecture. You'd be surprised how many companies do a cloud migration without thinking about security and thinking we will layer security on after, right? Because they've never done it, right? So, how do you know what you don't know? How do you kind of get ahead of the potholes? That's kind of the premise of our firm. And, I'm not going to get into it, but, the challenge is, learning from peers, learning from, mistakes. You can actually, go a little faster, have less bumps, when you can kind of understand what those challenges are. But yeah, at a high level, AI is driving everything, right? Because the boards, the CEOs, everyone is saying, why are we doing this? I see a headline here. I see a headline there. There's a lot of headlines that are, I'd say, kind of early on in the AI journey. They may not actually be doing some of what they're doing. So I think peeling the kind of the covers back a little bit. Everyone is struggling and also having opportunity and succeeding. So it's a super fun time. Um, I think most organizations are saying, okay, well, let's now reassess what we were doing, right? I think it just gives everybody an opportunity to say, okay, well, we were thinking about doing our cloud migration or data modernization project for this specific thing. So for example, worked with a manufacturing company who was, trying to do a cloud migration and modernization. It actually happened to coincide with, okay, now let's actually do predictive analytics and let's get better visibility onto, what we're actually building and also the outcome and output of our factory, right? And when they were doing that, it actually happened to work out around the same time that Gen AI came out. So they were able to kind of like leapfrog a little bit, right? So they were a little bit behind, but then they kind of got back on track. They were probably, I don't know, 5 to 7 years behind. Now they're probably 2 to 3 years behind, but that's fine. They don't need to be 2 to 3 years ahead, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we should get into it. Like, I know you didn't want to sort of pitch GigaOm. I think you were sort of shying away from that, but I think we should. And you should talk maybe a little bit about kind of the pitfalls you see and some of the ways that you guys can help organizations out there, right? Because I want to make sure that as people are going through this, they know that there's resources out there to help them. Because if you haven't gone through it, or it's so complicated, having an outside pair of eyes and hands to help can make a big difference. So maybe please do give us that sort of perspective and pitch, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So the gap we found in the market was that exactly what you said, right? Everyone wants to do all of these really transformational things or, modern tactical things, I'll call them. But you just never done them, right? And so, how do you choose when it's the right time to do it? How do you choose the right kind of resources? How do you know what potholes not to fall into? It's very hard for organizations to hire people internally. So many times they go out to consultants, right? Or they work with vendors to kind of figure out how to solve the problem. That is great. The problem is they are not customers, right? They are not the business. And so the big gap we found was that, these enterprise IT leaders, the enterprise business leaders, they need a peer who is, again, technical, understands the engineering challenges with these projects, and that no technology is perfect. So we built a firm that's really kind of the intersection of, research, consulting, strategy, and engineering. We don't try to do projects for customers. We want to help them be self-sustainable. We want to help them build strategies that are actually self-sustainable for their organization. We don't want to sell big projects that go on forever. We want to make them successful, and then, they'll come back for more. And it all comes from the mindset of, as a practitioner, this stuff is it's hard to manage. There's so much going on. You have the business requirements asking you about these things like AI. Where do you go for information? Right. And it's a very hard thing to, you have to bring a lot of different resources in, or you have to hire resources. And there's not a lot of companies who can actually give you that strategy to execution perspective and real world operational challenges, and be real about it. Right. Like, I think that's kind of the challenge too, is the challenge and opportunity for us. Right. We're a team of engineers, so we say how it is. Right.
Yep.
Which sometimes companies are ready for, right?
Yeah.
But we really are the peer. We speak the enterprise, the mid market, the SMB language. I got people from healthcare to financial services to manufacturing, from companies that are $10 million in revenue to $10 billion in revenue. And so I've kind of been able to kind of build the firm around, instead of looking at it like strategy down, right? Strategy down to architecture to engineering, and you have to kind of hire these different people at all these different paces and then puzzle it all together. There's just so many things that can go wrong. So we try to provide that framework to those puzzle pieces of how it all fits together, so that then you can have a clearer perspective on how to actually execute it. Right.
And how much of that work, or maybe I should say, ask this question this way, like, the ideal customer for you looks like what? 10 million to 10 billion is a pretty big range. Maybe let's not talk about the revenue. What are some of the key, key points that end up making it a really good fit for you guys, and you could end up really helping them?
Yep. So for a lot of the bigger companies, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of talent, they have literally every company in there helping them, right? And so for those companies, there's typically some gaps around some newer technologies that they need help on, or kind of connecting the legacy to the new technologies. So I have people from companies like American Airlines to Goldman Sachs that have worked on DevOps projects, AI projects. We're some of the early adopters in these technologies, so we have that expertise. We've kind of seen what has gone wrong, what hasn't gone wrong, and so those are some of the kind of types of projects that we get in. So good example. I had a guy here that ran IT operations at American Airlines. They did cloud observability kind of before anyone else did. They did AI ops before anyone else did. They tried a lot of things. They ended up buying 7 different vendors for 7 different reasons, right? And so understanding the complexity of managing a business and operations around a Fortune 100 federally regulated industry that's global, that is a challenge. And how do you kind of get new technology actually aligned with the business, and then building a strategy that you can actually execute on, and then knowing that it took that company about 4 years to actually get it going in the right way. Well, we can probably help you get it going in 9 months to 2 years, right? Because we have the battle scars, right? So that's for the kind of the bigger companies. For the mid market, SMB companies, it's really around building a strategy, right? They do not have a lot of time. They do not have a lot of resources. They do not have every single consulting company, research company in there. They just need to get stuff done, right? And they need to get it done in a practical way. That's why we like working with that part of the market, because they're starving for the most information. They don't have the resources to get all that, and they have to move a lot faster. So we like I said, we like to move quick. We like to do small projects, just get them kind of going on their way, and that typically tends to be the way that we engage those companies. And it could be around something like, hey, we just need to work on this concept of you know um, zero trust, right? Everyone says this thing is a zero trust thing. It's a big concept. You can't just buy ZTNA and say I'm doing zero trust, right? So, or identity, right? Okay, I'm just going to buy an identity platform and then I'm going to be doing identity, like giving them the broader perspective, understanding like there's different stages of maturity, and then helping them forward their maturity model or forward their operating model, and kind of their practice from, being a one on the maturity curve to a 1.1, and then a 1.2, and then a 1.3, and then they're stoked when they're at 1.3, right? And then let's take a break and then let's continue, versus an enterprise who's saying, hey, we're going to go from 1 to 4 in the next 4 years. We're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a totally different exercise and totally different perspective, right?
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing, obviously, in our business, we see a tremendous amount of identity transformation. And I'd say the other piece that we're seeing a lot, not just cloud migration and, getting to the cloud and how do you deal with identity and systems management, device management around that. We are also seeing quite a bit of transformation on the productivity and collaboration side. So all of these people who were, on Microsoft, on-prem, are now looking at, what are my options in the cloud? What are the ways that I can do things differently? And, you've got security in there, you've got data sovereignty, you've got a whole bunch of different factors going on now. And I think that's a pretty interesting space, at least in our one little piece of the world. You are seeing a lot of transformation, in identity and security and productivity, collaboration, and AI, I think, is underpinning a lot of that. Is that sort of consistent with what you're seeing, that like AI is underpinning a lot of these digital transformation projects? And, are you guys basically having to come up to speed on AI super fast because you need to be out ahead of everybody else?
Well, I think if you kind of go back to, probably COVID is a good example. There's just an explosion in change of how to run your business, right? At the time, there was still a lot of froth in the market, right? So, vendors were able to sell, end users would just buy whatever they could buy. And, companies were acquiring tons and tons of different applications, and there was tons and tons of companies building new SaaS solutions, right? So, I think there was a kind of an aperture for, how do I buy a tool to solve a tactical efficiency problem, right? Now everyone's saying, how do I actually build a strategy to solve this productivity efficiency problem, right? So we're going from buying tools to strategy. And in the meantime, they're like, well, we know shadow IT thing's been going on forever. Everyone's been buying stuff and IT doesn't know about it or whatever. It's become, that's why there's such an interest in visibility, right? It's kind of the stepping stone to getting, your estate in order. But then the second piece of that is, okay, great. Well, that the main way that attacks happen and the way that the, cyber challenges happen is through humans, right? So that's why identity is becoming such a huge critical thing. And then two, on the back end, on the infrastructure side, how do we attribute and have the context to the data around security, around the individual or the identity? That's why we're seeing such a huge change in how the vendors are operating and how they're building for identity, and then how customers are thinking about it, right? But yeah, we cover technologies like SSPM, for example, software security posture management, to data security posture management. DSPM is more about AI, data governance. We do a report on AI governance. There's a ton of different identity technologies, but even as you kind of go across these different categories that are all connected, and I'll pick AI and I'll come back to identity, AI governance, data security, DSPM. There's like an intersection of all of this, and no one vendor sits in the middle, right? And no one company sits in the middle, right? No one company needs all of these different things, right? With identity, you have new things like ITDR. You have identity platforms that we've talked about that you guys provide to the market. There's the concepts of zero trust and ZTNA. The challenge is, how do you manage your, I'm going to say, your people estate, right? And then once you got to go beyond that, I think people are starting to think about machine identity and all of that as they start to mature, as manufacturing matures, healthcare matures. then they're going to kind of cross into, okay, let's do things that are more sophisticated around how our technology is changing how we run that business.
I'm guessing what's interesting here is like you talked a little bit about visibility. Like, and I think about it as I bet you the same principles are going to apply in so many of these different contexts, right? So like if you want to use AI, if you want to leverage identity more, if you want to be, more cloud forward, all this, it's sort of like the same process probably is going to apply. So I think we sometimes believe everything's unique and, oh my gosh, AI, yes, there's a whole unique aspect to AI, but like the principles of how you take advantage of AI in your organization probably are pretty similar. So that's why like you guys can come in and you can help organizations really, because you understand this. You've seen it across so many different industries, so many different contexts.
Yeah, it's really about, it's about maturing and advancing, right? It's as simple as that, right? Like you cannot leapfrog. You have to do the basics to do the more medium tier things to do the more advanced things. And where you get into trouble is when you try to leapfrog, right? Or you try to do something like we're going to do a cloud migration and we're just going to do lift and shift, and that means digital transformation. That is not digital transformation. That's a tactical thing. Maybe that's the right thing, right? Maybe you just like, hey, like we need to reduce our data center footprint. We need to manage our security better. We're going to centralize it on one cloud instead of having 6 million clouds and 4 data centers and whatever, right? So I think it's really about I think really being able to manage the basics and being really good at the basics, and then thinking about how do I want to run my business better, operate my business better. And when I mean operating my business better, I don't mean like solving tickets and having less vulnerabilities and having less outages, which is important. But how does that actually enable the new business that you're building around AI or the new digital product that you're building, and actually partnering with that business. So it's where I think a lot of IT leaders, you need to be thinking more like a CTO, right? And less like a, IT person, right? This thing is the back end to it. And you have so much power. You have such a huge ability because the business doesn't understand the constraints and the opportunity that this technology provides. I was watching something on Jensen Wang talking about his newest thing. And he was talking about how like that one box is essentially like the whole traffic of the internet. Like,
Okay.
like what, what, what are you capable of doing because you have higher performance, right? Or you built ability to do time to market. That translates into the business. So I think you need to spend more time thinking about that, and less time thinking about how do I just like, manage tickets and then I think the business will want to have that conversation, and they'll really push to make changes, right?
Yeah. So let's maybe last thing here, but it's I think your point of maybe there's a couple fundamental points here. One of them is absolutely our technology leaders in our space need to think differently, right? Like they probably need to be business people as much as they're technologists, right? And they need to start understanding, how does the business operate and work? Because they're going to actually probably provide a lot more understanding of where things can go than, maybe folks that don't understand the technology, right? But I guess, the counterbalance to that is, what I'm also hearing is if we're looking at it from a technology perspective, you know, we might think incrementally rather than sort of thinking about like, how do we solve the overall, outcome problem? How do we leapfrog? But then you're also saying you can't sort of skip steps either. You have to do it in the right way. So maybe last couple thoughts for you on, advice, how do you bring all of this together over the last 30 minutes, 35 minutes that we've been talking about? How do you bring it back together to, a couple pieces of advice for the technology leaders out there?
Yeah, I think one, nail the basics, right? Which I think everyone is, but the basics keep changing. So that's the challenge, right? Table stakes keep changing. So I think that's the first thing, right? Two, start thinking about, really partnering with the business, which really means understanding the business as well as the business does, right? And I think having that curiosity, that interest goes a long way. And you'll find a leader there that wants to be your partner, right? Find a leader that's excited, that wants to break glass, that wants to, make change. Um, or if you're in an organization who doesn't want to do that, okay, great. Well, how do I modernize the business in a way that's impactful, that has a long-term strategy, and I think that's kind of the opportunity for a lot of IT leaders. I think with AI, it just provides a huge, massive opportunity for IT leaders, to just look at any business process that you have, go to any business leader, pick off a couple use cases, get some really quick, easy wins with it, and that it will be the drug to getting IT, into the business, right? Because they really want to leverage AI. Everyone wants to do something with it. Everyone has a lot of aspirations. You can be the hero, right? I think security also similarly. There's a lot of security challenges that a lot of different parts of the business don't understand, like OT security. Um, and so, you can be a hero, by helping the business, one, understand how it works, but then give them some quick wins. I think that is always the best way to build trust. It's one thing to say, yeah, I'm going to go do this and give you a bunch of money and I'm going to build a strategy. And then 3 years later, they get a new job, right? It's another thing to actually execute and, uh, and show your money where your mouth is, right?
And I think then maybe to put a capstone on this is, I I think IT leaders, technology leaders, um, I think they have an opportunity to step up into that sort of next level where, the value that they can provide. I think the next generation of CEOs, I would be shocked if not a lot of them started to come from the technology side of it. So, even at manufacturing companies, retail companies, all the non-tech, organizations of size and scale, I would not be surprised sort of if the next generation of leaders, the next generation of CEOs ends up being from the technology side. So I feel like there's a lot of upside opportunity for technology leaders to say, hey, if I get this right, I got a next step, which is a pretty big, interesting next step in my career. So
Yeah, 100%.
there's
Yeah,
a lot of good there.
yeah. You see a lot of, like, if you just look at the Fortune 500 and the big tech companies, you see a lot of intermixing there, right? They used to be the C level of something. Now they're the chief digital officer, or the CTO or CIO of those companies, and there's a lot of cross pollination. Um, yeah, I think there's another step that uh, the technologist needs to take to kind of get to the CEO level. To your point, but it is very intuitive, right? And I think we will see some of that, as companies make these transitions. Generation kind of changes over. There's different expectations for things like AI that will enable the business, and so I think there's definitely going to be some interesting things that happen here in the next couple of years.
Let's see. Thanks for taking time, Ben. We'll let's catch back up maybe in a little bit here and see whether some of these thoughts that we had play out over the next 12, 24 months. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting time. It is an interesting time, and it's only getting more interesting every day.
Yeah, agreed. Sounds good, Rajat. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking time.